Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of TCG Talk, back today with another video. And in today's video, I'm going to be going over the Arakni contract cards. I'm going to be talking about different contracts, what they're best for, and if you're new to the hero and you're new to the archetype, maybe help you make some deck choices, because right now with Arakni, there's a lot of contracts that are very commonly played, but there's also ones that I think people forget about. And it really, if you understand the contracts and what they're best into, and like what your meta currently is, whether you're at a Road Nationals level or higher, you can kind of chop and change and play different contracts, and I'll kind of talk about that as we go along. But hopefully this is helpful for you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. Hopefully you enjoy your stay. If you're a long-standing supporter, thank you so much as always. Feel free to check out the the Discord and the channel membership down below. We're doing really well. Y'all are amazing. Love y'all to death, and we'll get right into it. So I'm going to bring up some contract cards here. And so the first thing I want to say about contract cards is, I think there's been some common ones that are always played, and we'll talk about them in a second, like Surgical Extraction, Leave to Witnesses are like the two biggest ones, right? And then you have Eradicate, which is really big just because it's so powerful in Arakni if they ignore it, regardless if it makes silver or not. But in a really competitive setting, you need contract cards. Like, you have the basis ones, right, that are just really powerful, like those three. But you need to really think about what contracts you're using and why. And because you want to make silver consistently so you can cycle equipment, so you can get Graven callback, so you can do all that stuff and really get that incremental value that Arakni is looking for with their blocks, right? So you can have that option to play for fatigue or just be able to, cycle value over the course of a game. So because of that, there's certain cards that are better at different times. Like, there was at one point with Arakni where Annihilate the Armed was ran at literally a 9 of in some of the performing lists, because a lot of the lists were attack action based, aggro based, more tempo based, and it worked really well. Now in this meta, Annihilate the Armed is still one of the most consistent ones you can have, but it's not as quite useful. You're able to mix it up a little bit, and we'll kind of talk about that here in a second. So we'll get right into it. The first one is Annihilate the Armed. This one right now, it depends on what level you're playing at. You can be a lot more selective with your contracts if you're playing at just the Road to Nationals level. For example, I'm just going to use a pretty drastic example here. Let's say you're playing the Road Nationals and it's a 20-some person event. Let's just say 24 for argument's sake. And let's say for some crazy reason you are just Kasai City. You have 12 Kasais out of 24 in your local meta, right? And then you have 2 Dorinthias and something like that. Annihilate the Arm may only be ran at red just because it's 1 for 5. You may not run the blues. You may run something like a Slay the Scholars or a Sack the Shifty, or even a Nix the Nimble, heck, even if that, because it fits better because you're going to have a higher chance to generate silver against that heavy warrior meta. So keep thinking about that. But Annihilate the Arm is generally good in any decks that have attack actions, right? It's really good into Bravo, really good into Victor, good into Dromai, good into all the aggro decks, right? The only decks it's not very good into are usually Kasai, Dorinthia, Olympia, Axis Olympia, all the warrior stuff. However, the 1 for 5, in my opinion, is one of the most coveted spots in contracts. It's so good. Being able to pitch a blue, play Spider's Bite, and then attack with Annihilate the Armed. If your opponent's an attack action heavy deck, even if they have 3 block attack actions, they have to give you 3 cards or 2 cards in equipment just to block out that Annihilate the Armed fully. So if they're blocking with all attack actions. So the 1 for 5 is so good. I think you always should run this at red no matter the meta, unless the meta truly becomes like all warrior, because that 1 for 5 is just so nice off of a Tunic, off of a Spider's Bite, so on and so forth. So hopefully that's like the easiest one. So this one, Already Dead. So Already Dead, not even talking about silver generation. Already Dead's already just a good card in general, right? It's a 2 for 6. It's a popper. It blocks 3. Really good off a Cut to the Chase. 3-card hand, 3-card 9. That allows you to deal a lot of damage and potentially get some silver. This meta, though, specifically, it's actually pretty good at generating silver. The problem, not really a problem, but the drawback to Already Dead originally was the only time you really get silver off of it is off a D-React. But right now, there's a lot of decks in the game that are playing instants and playing D-Reacts and playing heavier equipment, right? Like, every deck in the game has really heavy equipment. So Already Dead literally tells your opponent, like, okay, you better hope to God you can block this out if you block it with equipment, because if not, I'm going to take your equipment, right? Literally yesterday, I took a Dash's Tekla Foundry Heart because I Spider Bite, Tunic, played Already Dead. They tried to block out with 2 cards and a piece of equipment. I played Cut to the Chase off of it and took their Tekla Foundry Heart. Now, should they have blocked with Heart? Probably not, but some people were greedy, right? And so you're able to generate silver off of that. There's a lot of cards that are playing a lot of attack reactions and defense reactions, because you got to think, like, most people think about Already Dead getting silver off defense reactions, but it also gets silver off attack reactions, right? So heroes like Kasai, very, very good into. Even heroes like Katsu, right, with Art of War and Razor and Ancestral, really good into that. Good into Dorinthia, good into Bolton, right? These heroes that run a lot of reactions, it can do it. And there's a lot of instants in the game right now as well, like Tome and, Art of War and all those. So I think that this is a lot better than it used to be at creating silver, and it's just a really powerful card. This card is always probably going to be in your deck regardless as an Arakni, but it's really good if you're trying to decide between cards. It's really good into Kasai, really good into any hero that has a fridge of armor that you're trying to push through or at least prevent from them from using all the time. It's good into Katsu. It's good into Dromai. It's a popper. Definitely recommend running this card. Then you have Eradicate. So Eradicate is usually always an Arakni list just because of how powerful it can be off of like multiple Cut to the Chases and Shreds. However, when it comes to generating silver, this card's the best it's ever been. Kasai, it's really good into Bolton, really good into Rhinar, really good into KO. A lot of big decks right now are actually running a fair amount of yellows. All the brutes run an amount of yellows. Kasai runs a lot of yellows. Bolton runs a lot of yellows. You're even decks like Azalea run some yellows, or Rain Razors and Codex. All these different, and even a lot of the power cards in some decks, like Art of War and stuff, are also yellows. So it's gotten a lot better at generating silver, is what I'm trying to say. It's still a little bit bad in the Victor and Bravo outside of just like trying to get rid of cards from their deck. But when it comes to silver generation, this card is better than it's ever been. And even in some like Contract Uziri list that normally didn't run this card, I would actually argue to run it now, because of its better and more enhanced silver generation. So that's kind of where I'm at with Eradicate. Fleece the Frail is not ran as much right now, right? So you're contracted to banish opponents' cards with 2 or less defense. This is probably the least used contract at the moment. So at the time of recording this, so if you're watching this a couple months from now, it might have changed when Miss Veil comes out. But right now, there's a lot of decks with a lot of 3 blocks, right? Warrior, all 3 blocks. Outside maybe Agile, Wind-Up, and Tome of Fiendal, they're not running a whole lot, right? Or Cash In, I guess. Guardian running pretty much no 2 blocks, right, in their deck. Brute, pretty much all 3 blocks, with the exception of like Agile Wind-Ups and very few like choice things, right? So Fleece of Frail is probably the least useful at the moment, at the time of recording this. However, if we ever get into a meta that has, this is very good in the red line Dromai. That is the one deck it's good into right now. But if we ever got into a heavy aggro meta with a lot of 2 blocks, then this card would immediately go back up. The issue is this card kind of fights for the same spot as Plunder the Por, because most decks that are running like low cost to the ground attack cards are also running like 2 blocks, most, except for Warrior. So to me, because it competes with that, it's not used as much. But if we ever get into a heavy meta of aggro decks, first off, Arakni's going to have a fun time. It's going to be a good meta for Arakni. This might come into play. But in the current meta, this is probably the least used one, to be completely honest. Even more least useful than Nix the Nimble. Then we have Leave No Witnesses. I mean, what can we say about this card? The silver is nice, but you're really just using this to threaten that arsenal. Really good in Dromai for silver generation. Pretty good into Kasai. Kasai does run a good amount of reds. Good into all the aggro decks. Not as good into Guardian, but that's about it. It's even good into Brute, because all Brutes run good quality reds. This card's just great. Nothing crazy there. Then we have Nix the Nimble. This is the one that I have not ever put in a deck, but I'm this close to doing it as of late. There's a lot of decks right now that are running reactions. A lot. Both attack and defense reaction cards. Right, this is amazing into Kasai. It's very good into Bolton. It's very good into Katsu. It's very good into a lot of the decks right now that are trying to like outvalue you. Not as good into KO. It's okay in the Levia with some of the D-Reacts she can run. Good in a Rhinar. A lot of the Rhinar lists are running Sinks and Fates. It's just good overall into a lot of the decks right now. Even Bravo's starting to run like really tanky builds. The problem with this card normally is decks that have a lot of reactions typically have a lot of defense reactions, which means cards aren't hitting as much. So, is it worth the slot over like an Annihilate the Ard or even a Rob the Rich right now, which is also doing really well. But basically, I think this card is most useful in a warrior meta. So if we ever get in a meta that has a ton of warrior, like weapon-based warriors, I think that's where this card shines the most. But again, it's that 1 for 5, and that 1 for 5 is just so good. So you always can make the argument for it. Next one's Plunder the Por. So in the current meta, this is really good into Kasai. She has a lot of like 1 cost or less stuff, pretty much everything except for Nourishing Emptiness and Overpower. Really good into Dorinthia, really good into Katsu, really good into Jeremiah. Good into everything except Guardian. Guardian's the only thing in the meta right now that's not good. And I guess Brute as well, but even Brute has some 1 or less, like with Blood Rush Bellows and stuff like that. And Savage Feast and, especially Levia, like Boneyard Marauder and Graveling Growl and stuff like that, and Slithering Shadowpede, Art of War, right? It hits her even really well. It doesn't hit Rhinar and them quite as much, but it does help, do some stuff off Blood Rush Bellow and off their Sinks and their Fates and their Savage Feasts. So definitely, this is the best 0 for 4 currently right now that's not Leave No Witnesses. It's the most versatile one for the meta currently, and it's always going to be good because people want to run low-cost stuff, with the exception of Guardian and some Brute. Most every class runs lower-cost stuff, so it's going to be pretty high chance of getting silver with that. Then we have the biggest, most improved contract of this meta so far. That's Rob the Rich. This is a 6-of in my deck right now. It's just good in the most of the meta. It's not as good in the Kasai, although you can find Nourishing Emptiness if you're lucky. It's very good in the Brute, and it's very good in the Guardian, which are the 2 most represented classes at the moment. Not as good in the Kasai, or in the Jeremiah again, unless she has Command and Conquer or Nourishing in her deck. But yeah, in gets Brute and Guardian, this is pretty much always going to have a good chance of making silver. This card was never really used, before this meta because we had such a low-to-the-ground meta. But in this meta, it's really, really nice. And most lists are teching for Jeremiah and Guardian, most. So because of that, it's being used a lot more. And again, it's in that coveted 1 for 5 slot. So if you have a lot of Guardian in your meta, a lot of Brute, this is the auto-include, in my opinion. Then I've had 2 people now explain this card to me a lot better, and I'm on it a lot more than I was before. So Sack the Shifty is really interesting. You're contracted to banish cards with Go Again. And at first, I had Slay the Scholars in this slot, but I've learned that a lot of the reactions don't have Go Again, but a lot of the pumps and a lot of the non-attacks also have Go Again in most decks. So you think about Kasai, right? I'm just going to name random pumps, right? Commanding Performance, Sharpened Steel, Outland Skirmish, and then you have other non-attacks. I'm trying to think, like Azalea's like Lace with Frailty, Lace with Inertia, Lace with Blood Rot, Codex of Frailty. All of these, they're non-attacks, so they ping off of Slay, but they also ping off Sack the Shifty because they all have Go Again. Very few decks in the game run non-attack actions that don't have Go Again. Kano being one. Guardian kind of does with like Imposing Visage. It's Showtime and stuff like that, but that's also very niche, right? Like, there's not a deck in the game that's relevant outside of Kano that runs non-attack actions that don't also have Go Again. So if you're running Slay the Scholars in your deck, you might as well just run Sack the Shifty because you're getting the same exact contract or silver generation probability as you do with Slay the Scholars. However, you're also can hit cards with natural Go Again, like Surging Strike, right? Or Ronin Renegade, like a lot of the aggro decks that have natural Go Again in their stuff. Or even Jeremiah, who runs, Billowing Mirage and Flame Call Awakening and stuff like that. So it hits the non-attack actions that have Go Again, but it also hits the attack actions that have Go Again, right? So if you're running Slay a Scholars in your deck, just run Sack the Shifty. I think it's better right now. The only time it's not as good, in my opinion, is Guardian. But at that point, like, it's very, very niche. So, or Kano, obviously Kano, but Kano we're already a little bit in trouble for, let's be honest. So Sack the Shifty is definitely, if out of all these contracts in this current meta that most people aren't running that I think should be running, Sack the Shifty is probably the main one. Then we have Slay the Scholars, what I just talked about. It's still very good. And if you're running a straight 0-for-4 Cheerio list where you're trying to make the most coercive tendency, definitely still include it. This is very good in the Kasai, very good in the Azalea, and it's decent in pretty much every deck with the exception of Guardian. Guardian's very niche, but it hits pretty much every other major deck in the game. Even Brute does have, like their Blood Rush Bellows and stuff like that. So definitely look at this. And barraging beatdowns, so definitely look at this. I think it's very solid. I just think in the moment I'd run Sack the Shifty over Slay the Scholars. Then we have Surgical. I mean, enough said about this one. There's a lot of blues in the game right now with Brute and Guardian, and even Kasai is running like a couple of blues. Dromai, this isn't going to really hit anything unless they run Passing Mirage into you. That's about it. But overall, obviously a solid card. But yeah, hopefully that helped a little bit and kind of give you your choices. The main point of this video is like really think about like the Sack the Shifty to Slay the Scholars argument. Really think like, okay, what did these two cards hit? Let's go down, like take each one of these contracts and be like, all right, let's go down each contract and let's go down the 5 top meta decks that we perceive are the meta decks and see Silver Generation. Because then when you get to cards like Slay the Scholars and Sack the Shifty, you're like, wait a second, Sack the Shifty hits everything that Slay the Scholars hits and more. So should we include that, right? Rob the Rich is hitting a lot more now. Should we include that? Nix the Nimble, we have a lot of Kasai in our area, a lot of Warrior. This actually might be good for as a 1-for-5 over Rob the Rich, right? Maybe we don't have as much Guardian in our area. We have more Warrior. So maybe we swap out Rob the Rich and put in Nix the Nimble. Just get a little bit more crazy with it. I think the contracts are all about tuning it to what your meta is. And a calling level, you kind of just got to take what you think the best decks are and go from there. But at a Road to Nationals level, you can really get smart with how you're doing your contracts. And I think people can think about it a little bit harder and be able to tune their deck the most efficient that they can. Because getting that Silver Generation, it's so important, especially with Graven Call now. And we're very actually Silver resource hungry if we're humming. So because of that, definitely get a check out. But hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully it helped a little bit. I wanted to kind of just give a cursory kind of glance at how I approach contracts. If you want me to go super in depth, please let me know in the comments below what information you want more of. I try to make these bite size and a little bit more digestible than doing like an hour long just grind fest on it. I like to do those like in live streams. But yeah, thank you all so much. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you so wish. If not, me is totally fine. Go to another creator, do it for them so we can get more people seeing this game. And I'll see y'all next time on TCG Talk. Thank y'all so much.